Hi friends, it's nice to be back on TikTok. The band didn't last very long, and so I'm going to make the first video since we all came back because one of the followers on my channel, Timothy, sent in a question which I think is very timely and pretty tough, which is, in this changing political landscape in the United States, how do we use our practice to help us deal with it? And that's a big question, and that's an important question because there's a lot of big scary stuff going on right now. The new president has signed a lot of executive orders very quickly. There's a lot of concern about how things are going to shake out, and so there's a lot of fear and anger and uncertainty right now. And so how do we deal with that? And how do we deal with that through the lens of our Zen and Buddhist practice? And so I was thinking about how I wanted to answer this one, and I think I'm going to use the three refuges, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, as the framework to talk about this question. And so I like to look at the Buddha as the example, right? The exemplar, the example that we follow. And there are two things I want to talk about in terms of using the Buddha as an example. So the first one is a story. And the story is just that while the Buddha is wandering around India, teaching people, there's a monk named Tissa who gets very ill. He gets boils on his flesh, and the monks take care of him, and then the boils burst, and so now he's kind of covered in these open wounds, and now the monks are kind of scared, and they stop taking care of him. And so the legend is that the Buddha goes and takes care of him, brings him water, cleans his wounds, and he's taking care of him, and he tells the monks, go boil water and bring fresh wrappings and that kind of thing. And this is often held up as an example of the Buddha's compassion, which it is, but it also, to me, is an example of doing what needs to be done, dealing with what is in front of you. The Buddha didn't say, oh, Tissa, you should be so enlightened or so detached that physical pain has no meaning for you, or you should understand all things as emptiness and let it go and it's all fine. No, somebody was sick and the Buddha took care of him. And this is what I think that we should be doing. If we see things in our life, in the world, that we think need help, need fixing, are not okay, we should take care of them. And so I think sometimes, especially in Western Buddhism, you sometimes get this like, oh, I'm going to be so enlightened, nothing will ever bother me, or I should just have I should be neutral because all things are emptiness and all things are impermanent. Yeah, but if people are sick, if people are dying, if people are suffering, if you're suffering, just pretending to be neutral and detached is ridiculous. And so as much as this is an example of the Buddha's compassion, to me this is also an example of the Buddha just doing what needed to be done. You take care of what's in front of you. And so that's the first thing that I say about Buddhism and how we approach it. So it's okay to look at the world and say there are things that need fixing, and I'm going to do my best to do my part. The other thing that I want to use from the Buddha's example is that after his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, the Buddha wandered around India for about 40 years preaching and teaching people, and then passed away. But there was a cycle to it. If you read the stories, every rainy season the Buddha would go back to Rajagaha and have kind of like a rest period. And so in this way, although he was engaged in the world, he would take breaks. There was a cycle. It wasn't pedal to the metal, balls to the wall all the time, burning himself out. There were breaks. And even in his day-to-day teachings, if you read the legends, the legends are often very much that the Buddha would meet with people and teach for a few hours, and then he would go and meditate for a while, and then he would meet with people and teach for a few hours and then go back and meditate. So even within his day, the Buddha was taking time to kind of recenter, to refocus on what's most important, to, we might say, engage in self-care, but they were seeing it as kind of like re-engaging with that kind of enlightenment. And so both in this kind of yearly cycle of during the rainy season resting, and in this daily cycle of taking time for himself to recenter, to refocus, to connect with what was most important, this is a really important example for us as well. If you are pedal to the metal, balls to the wall, burning yourself out, you're not going to help anybody. You're going to harm yourself, and you're going to burn out, and you're not going to be in the good fight for the long haul. And if you want to be in the good fight for the long haul, you have to understand that taking care of yourself, taking breaks, taking seasons of rest is really important. And so this is more than some of the other things for today's video. What I'm asking you to focus on is this example of the Buddha very simply doing what needed to be done, dealing with what was in front of him, and the cycle of engagement and rest, or engagement and recentering. And that leads to the second of the three refuges, which is the Dharma, right? The three refuges are Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And so if we take refuge in the Buddha's example, and then we take refuge in the Dharma, we think about the teachings. So we understand emptiness. Things are empty of inherent existence. That does not mean things don't exist. It means that they exist interconnectedly. And what's interesting about that is that again means we are part of the world. We have a responsibility to the world. We don't get to just check out. And you are part of that as well. I've said this in other videos. If your compassion excludes yourself, it's incomplete. So understand that you and all things are empty of inherent existence, which means we're actually all interconnected. We're all in it together. And I think that this helps because we want to engage, but we want to avoid falling into the trap of hatred, because the hatred is not helpful. And there's a teaching in the Dhammapada, because remember this is Dharma, that says hate is never dispelled by hate, only love dispels hate. And sometimes it's translated slightly differently, but that's the gist of it. Hate is never dispelled by hate. If you feel like the current people in power are fueled by hatred and greed and so on and so forth, if you meet them with hate, it's not going to dispel the hate. We've seen this already, where hate just gets hate and then the other person hates them more, and it's just a never-ending cycle. So this recognition of interdependence, of empty of inherent existence, of we're all in this together, helps us understand that we are not separate, that we are actually part of the politician that you don't like, the billionaire that you don't like, the actions that they do. They are part of us and we are part of them. And the first person that is harmed by hatred or anger is yourself. And you're not going to dispel hatred or anger by engaging in hatred and anger. And I tell you this from experience, if you are a flipped out rage monster, you can't be productive. You can't be helpful. You're too busy being a flipped out rage monster. This doesn't mean you don't get angry sometimes. Anger is our way of telling us that something is not right. And here's our way of telling us that we need to take care of the monk Tisa with the boils and the sores all over his body. We need to deal with what's in front of us. But if you kind of break the ninth precept, which is not harboring ill will. Again, we're going to feel these things, but if we harbor them, if we cuddle them to us and make them part of our identity, and we allow it to make it justifiable for us to hate and wish harm on the other person, all we're doing is putting more hatred and negativity into the world. And so the Dharma helps us relate to the world in a way that is more compassionate. And, hate is never dispelled by hate, only love dispels hate. That does include like the love of the mama bear, that fiercely protective, I'm gonna protect my people. As a teacher, one of the things I've thought about, because I have to, is if ICE were to come to my classroom door, and I would block the door. I wouldn't let them in. I wouldn't engage in violence. I would just say, you can't come in. And if you want to body slam a teacher and a priest and put me in handcuffs, that will make for a very interesting headline, I imagine. But I'm gonna mama bear, so to speak, my students. That's my job. That's part of my oath. And so the love doesn't have to be like rainbows and unicorns love. We're not talking about romantic love. We're talking about that. It can be that first protective love, but the hatred is not dispelled by hatred. And that's a really important thing to remember. And then the last thing is Sangha. And Sangha is the whole world. But I think in this case, when we're thinking about how do we use our practice to not be knocked off balance in these scary and troubling times and engage with the world, we understand that Sangha can be our Buddhist community. It can be our family, if our family is healthy. It can be trusted friends. And then it can be groups that you believe in. I will tell you that I have marched and probably will again. I have written my congressman and probably will again. I've donated to groups that I believe in, probably will again. And that is also Sangha. So I have my Buddhist Sangha, I have my trusted friends, and I have those trusted organizations that I understand that I am part of. So Sangha is the whole world. But I think when we're talking about how do we get support for ourselves in this trying time, and how do we engage with the world in ways that are helpful, we can understand that Sangha is the community that supports us and those organizations that we can support for the things that we believe in. And so I hope that this is helpful. It's kind of a long video, but Buddhism actually can and should be engaged. It's not an excuse to try to like bliss out in the clouds. And the teachings and the Dharma can be used to help us be causes for good in the world. Thank you.